Good morning in the USA, good afternoon in Europe, good evening in Bangladesh. Welcome. I'm sorry that we had some technical difficulties, but we are live now and I hope you are able to join us. We are so glad that you could join us today in what promises to be a remarkably interesting conversation on Louis Kahn and his life around architecture, particularly the Parliament building in Dhaka. Recently, I reread what Kahn once said: an assembly building is a transcendent place, a place, no matter what kind of rogue you are, when you go into an assembly building, somehow you may end up voting for the right thing. Against the backdrop of the looming US presidential election, the chaos here and the world, the pandemic anxiety, the uncertainty that engulfs us, we all desperately long for the right thing. We all want to reinforce what we consider in our disparate ways the right thing. It is in this contested spirit of the right thing that we continue to find Kahn's work both relevant and necessary. Our interest in his work remains undiminished. We continue to explore new angles to explain his architectural philosophy. So when recently Sue and Kahn, Sundaram Tagore, my wife and I met at dinner in New York, we got into an animated conversation on Kahn's life and work. We discussed why people continue to research on him, what motivates them, what else is there to know about him, what is left still. So intense was the exchange that my wife suggested this got to be a public conversation. So we had this idea that we should organize a virtual meeting. Happily, Henry Wilcots agreed to participate too. So this is the origin of the meeting. We are incredibly happy to have a heavyweight panel today with Sue and Kahn, Henry Wilcots, and Sundaram Tagore. So, and I welcome all of you to join us. Before I introduce our panelists, let me just say a few words about our meeting today. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties that we were having at the outset. But I think we are good now, but except Henry, who couldn't join us with a video, but he is here with his voice. We will converse for an hour and a half following a 30-minute question and answer. But in the meantime, please go ahead and post your questions in Zoom chat room. Our team will curate the questions and send them to me, which I will then present to our panelists. So let me introduce our panelists today. Sue Ann Kahn, daughter of Louis Kahn, has advocated for the preservation and restoration of her father's architecture for over 3 decades. She has also been an active consultant and significant lender to the major exhibitions of his work. In 1996, she co-curated Louis Kahn drawings, travel sketches in synagogue project for the Jewish Museum in New York. Most recently, she collaborated on The Light of Color, The Treasury of Shadows, an exhibition of Kahn's pastels at his Kimball Art Museum. She's a noted flutist, chamber musician, and teacher. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you. Happy to
Henry Wilcots, after serving in the US Marine Corps, Henry Wilcots studied architecture at the University of Colorado during the 1950s. His architectural career began in Denver. When an opportunity to work with an international architectural firm came, he moved to Karachi in West Pakistan, where he worked for 2 years. During his stint in West Pakistan, he was invited by an East Pakistani PWD engineer to work on a project in Dhaka. As fate would have it, he met Kahn in Dhaka at a hotel, kind of accidentally, eventually coming to Philadelphia in 1964 to work for Louis Kahn for the next 20 years. Besides working on the Bangladeshi Parliament building, Henry worked on projects in India, Nepal, Israel, Italy, and the USA. After Kahn accidentally died at Penn Station in New York in 1974, it was Henry who served as the Parliament building's project architect until it was finished in 1983. In 1989, when Louis Kahn's Parliament building received the prestigious Aga Khan Award for architecture, it was Henry who received the award in Egypt on behalf of the late Louis I. Kahn. Sundaram Tagore is a Calcutta-based, Oxford-educated art historian, gallerist, and award-winning filmmaker. A descendant of the poet and Nobel Prize winner Rabindranath Tagore, he promotes East-West dialogue through exhibitions and events at his eponymous contemporary art galleries in New York, Singapore, Hong Kong, and London, and at museums worldwide. Tagore was previously director at Pace Wildenstein Gallery, New York. He has worked with many international organizations, including the National Gallery of Modern Art, New Delhi, the Metropolitan Museum and the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the United Nations. He's a trustee of the Isamu Noguchi Museum in New York. Tagore has written for numerous art publications and lectures frequently on art, most recently at the Tailberg Forum, Sweden, Sotheby's, Hong Kong's Foreign Correspondents Club, and Singapore Management University. Louis Kahn's Tiger City, his feature-length documentary on Louis Kahn, debuted at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2019. I'm sorry, Sundaram, that I missed the debut. It is currently streaming on Amazon Prime and the PBS All Arts channel. Can we have the clip one, please? Okay, let's begin so without further ado, let's begin. Let's start with you, Sue, with a familial question. You are Louis Kahn's daughter. Perhaps more than anybody else, today, you can help us better understand how Father Louis Kahn and architect Louis Kahn became one. Or did they? Give us a sense of a typical dinner table conversation at your house about architecture. What was your father most passionate about talking at the dinner table? What kind of gifts did you receive from him? What did you admire the most about him as your father?
In that question, Adnan, thank you for that. A typical conversation around the table consisted of my father talking about his work, whatever he was most excited about at the time. And many a holiday dinner had the whole family spellbound with the tales, and all someone had to say was, "Oh, what are you working on now, Lou?" And off he would go, and he would talk for hours. But he would also talk about the great architecture of the past. And I was probably the only child of my age who heard about the Baths of Caracalla and the Pantheon at breakfast. Uh, as to gifts, he loved giving gifts to people. And when I was a child, there were books of fairy tales and books with great illustrations. And later there was jewelry and yards of cloth from wherever he traveled from, Egypt and India. And I sewed my own clothes, so I was really very thrilled about the cloth. But the most important gifts, and I think here is where I can really merge father and architect together. These were his instructions to me on how to become a good and true person. And I think they say a lot about him as a person and an artist. Um, First of all, develop your talents and persevere, as he did. Second, look for the good in other people and trust them. He had tremendous trust in other people, especially young people. It was not always repaid to him, but he continued to trust people all his life. Third of all, be kind. And I think his students will confirm that even though he could be a very tough minded critic, he would never belittle them or make them feel small. And that is in great contrast to most architectural critiques, even today. And fourth, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. And I guess the harshest critique he ever gave of another architect was when he called Mises Seagram building the lady in the golden corset, which was about as critical as he could get. And lastly, that art and beauty are more important than money or things. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, yeah, thank you, thank you. So let's go to Henry. Henry.
Yes, please.
Can you, we know, Henry, we know that you met Kahn in Dhaka kind of accidentally at Shahbag Hotel, which later became Sheraton. Tell us about that. How did you get to work for him? And at
Yeah.
so at first you were reluctant to come to Philadelphia for a host of reasons. What made you change your mind? How was working for Kahn like? Tell us a bit about the work environment in his office in Philadelphia.
Well, I'll start first by at our meetings in Dhaka, when we first met, it was over a meal. And then we used to take breakfasts together, and he would probe me about questions of who I knew and my schooling and personal things. But then he spent more time talking about Angola than anything else, because that project had just completed itself politically. But anyway, he invited me to Philadelphia, not to work, but he would just say, you must come to Philadelphia. And he would say that over and over again. So finally, when I did come back to the States, I called him and said, I can't come to Philadelphia because family events in the Midwest. But he sent me a cable saying that I would be welcome whenever. So I turned around and came to Philadelphia. And now I found Philadelphia a strange place, having lived abroad and in Denver for some time. But I found looking for a place to live was very difficult. Philadelphia was quite segregated at the time. And there were pockets of where you could find a place to live. Sue Ann's mother called me, and she is the one who got the ball rolling. Now, I had not met her at all, so we sort of met on a telephone. And she told me the best place to go in Philadelphia to live would be Germantown or Monterey. And that's how I ended up in Germantown. which is part of Philadelphia, of course. But anyway, in doing the work, I immediately started working with the hostels. And let me throw something in here a little bit. When I think of the work in Dhaka, I think of the total campus, not just the Parliament building, but the total campus itself was my bailiwick, in which I had to look after. So anyway, I started with the hostels and then took on the Parliament building.
Okay, okay. So would you talk a little bit about Shah-Bagh Hotel, the circumstances in which you ran into him a little bit?
Yeah, pardon my laughter, but the Shah-Bagh Hotel was the five-star hotel of Dhaka in the 1960s. It was where there was another called the Green Hotel, which you probably don't know anything about. It was just off Elephant Road, which it no longer exists. But anyway, the Shah-Bagh was the fine hotel, and it's where most prominent folks or foreigners and whatnot stayed. And we would take our meals there. And in the evening meal, and even sometimes in the lunchtime, they had live music. I mean, a fellow would play a string instrument, and which Lou enjoyed very much. It was just surprising to me because I didn't know Lou that much. But anyway, he enjoyed this man playing the string instrument. And but that's where we would have our meals, and I would be invited to tag along. Now, the officials of PWD always introduced me as Professor Kahn's associate or Professor Kahn's assistant. And one day I spoke to Lou privately and said, look, I don't work for you. I have my own job with another architect, and I'm disturbed by them calling me your assistant or your associate. And he just patted me on the head or on the shoulder and said, it's okay. And we went along for that. So during receptions or meeting with even the president, Ayub Khan, you know, I was introduced as Professor Kahn's associate. And it just was something that we had between us.
Okay, okay, sounds good, sounds good. So Sundaram, your documentary, Louis Kahn's Tiger City, was completed last year after years of research, traveling, and filming. Tell us a bit about how your project began. How did you become interested in Louis Kahn's architecture? What was the key motivation? Who did you want to be Tiger City's main audience? So in general, tell us a little bit about your film.
Yeah, you're right. It took 7 years to make that film. And, so I went to essentially 14 countries to film, but in the end, I ended up showing around 11 in this film. But what happened is that I went to a small college in the States called College of Worcester. And a professor of mine by the name of Arn Lewis, and I was very close to him. And he was giving a lecture, I believe it was on the world architecture. And he was assembling all these slides. And he pulled out this slide and showed it to me. And this is in the 80s. And I was really mesmerized by this sort of image of Louis Kahn's architectural complex. And I was thinking about it and I said, I'm going to write a paper. And then a few years later, I got a travel grant to travel to Dhaka. And at that point, the building was completed. And I believe they had their first convention of some form of Islamic countries. And it was spanking new and it was awe-inspiring. I'd never seen anything like this. It was kind of Pyrenean dream. It was a verging between modern complex and ancient, and I couldn't quite pinpoint. And at that point, a Taiwanese friend of mine, and she had given me a movie camera, 8mm Sony camera, And she said, "You're going to Dhaka, you may want to use this camera." And I had no idea how to make a film. So I recorded all this shots, my hand flickering all over the place. So when I came back and I screened it to show it to my professor, I realized that what a terrible job I had done. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make a film one day on this complex. And that's how it began. So when I went to Dhaka at that point, I met with, I think his name was a really very kind individual, Anwar Hussain. He was head of PWD architect, and me, Mubashir Ali. They were very generous and kind to me. And I wandered around the whole Parliament building, for many days actually. And I got to have a real sense of what the Parliament was all about. And I went back and I wrote a paper, and that's how it all began. And that was in the mid 80s.
Okay, great, great. So let's ask Sue another question. Sue, much has been written on Louis Kahn. Books, both scholarly and critical, are found aplenty. Documentaries were made, exhibitions have been organized, but myths were also created. One of them has been about his unexpected death at Penn Station in New York, that his body lay unclaimed for days at the New York morgue, allegedly because his passport didn't have an address. Is this fact or fiction?
Well, since you asked, it's pure fiction. His body did lie unclaimed for 2.5 days because both the New York and Philadelphia police really messed up. His home address wasn't his passport. It was in the immunization record at the back, and it was also very clearly on the suitcase that was with him. But for some reason, the New York police alerted the Philadelphia police and asked them to notify Esther Kahn, who's my mother, at the 1501 Walnut office address, which was, I guess, on some plans or office documents he had with him. This was a Sunday and was also a holiday, St. Patrick's Day, and the Philadelphia police went to the office. No one was working there, and then they went back to the station and filed the report in the wrong box, which was not found for days afterwards. And my father had phoned my mother to tell her that he had missed his connecting flight and would take the train home. So we knew something happened, and eventually it all got sorted out. But my mother did not get to New York until Tuesday to identify his body. And the careful research into all of this can be found in Wendy Lesser's biography, which is very informational. For those who haven't read it, it's called You Say to Brick by Wendy Lesser, and you can read all about it there.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Sue. So Henry, one more question for you.
Good.
You disseminated Kahn's ideas in a very calm and composed manner. How did you do that? Reportedly, working in Kahn's firm was intense. Kahn called up people at 3 in the morning to inquire about a model half done or building drawings incomplete. In Dhaka, Kahn knocked on your hotel door at odd hours, asking if you had any gin. How did you remain calm working with him? From what I have read, Kahn was very fond of you. What did he like in you?
The gin. But no, I also received those early morning calls. So there was no favoritism about that at all. In fact, I told my wife at the time, I said, well, look, I may come home early tonight, and we better be ready to pack up and leave. But then, you get into the office, and Lou would walk up and sit with your board, and as if nothing had happened overnight. And away we would work again. So, no, he was that way. What was the furthest question? Yeah, your next question.
Okay, so let me return to Sundaram. Uh, Sundaram, Nathaniel Kahn's My Architect is as much about Louis Kahn. It is also a great deal about Nathaniel himself. The autobiographical nature in his film is unmistakable. As much as he was seeking to reconcile with his father, Nathaniel was also trying to find himself. He wanted to find some closure to his melancholia and seek his father, who he longed for as a kid. What did you want to find in your documentary? Is this your love of architecture as art and humanism?
Yeah, I agree. Nathaniel's is a beautiful film, and his maybe an autobiographical in nature, but mine isn't. Mine, although I'm playing a personal role in this film, and it's very personal for me because I come from that region. But if you look at this, my film is all about architecture, about Louis Kahn, and it's about Bangladesh in a global context. And so I take this long journey because I come from that area, and I needed to personalize the film. I didn't want a detached kind of a voice of God. So because of that, I follow the footsteps of Louis Kahn in so many different countries, and mine is a cyclical film. If you look at it, Nathaniel's film, I've only seen it once. I didn't want to see it more than once because I did not want to be influenced by it. And I had this conversation with Nathaniel, and he's produced such a beautiful film. I didn't want to compete in any shape or form. So, but his film begins in the West and ends in Bangladesh. My film is much more cyclical. It actually, I start the journey in Bangladesh and I return to Bangladesh. And in a way, by default, it becomes a sequel to his film. His film ends in Dhaka, and he raises all these questions. And in a way, when you look at it, it kind of explains all those questions that come up. And so the film is, for me, it's really about architecture. It's really about Louis Kahn, and it's about Dhaka, or it's about Bangladesh, the parliamentary complex. What the people did in order to create that structure like that, with Louis Kahn as a client, as an architect, how do you create a mammoth architectural complex in this day and age? And something like what Henry once told me, 2,000 people worked on it for 23 years. It's like a pyramid being constructed. So when you think about it, how do you get to design a complex like that in this day and age? Meaning in the 70s and 80s, and it's unheard of. So that was a very, very appealing for me. And I wanted to find out and create a film based on that.
Okay, great, thank you. So Henry, returning to you again, we would like to hear about your experience in Dhaka during the 1960s and after the country's independence. How did you manage to keep the construction process going? How did you manage the local bureaucracy and the local rudimentary construction technology? And we know that payments to architects have been consistently delayed. How did you all keep the spirit up? So before you answer, Henry, let's play a clip, clip number 4. Then we'll look forward to hearing your answer.
Once we got things underway there, it was a very, very exciting period. I was going out to Dhaka 2, 3, 4 times a year. So when you first got out there, they had stockpile. And they showed Lou this brick, you know, and it didn't work. But Lou was the kind of a person who said, but we will find a way to use it.
And what did you do with those bricks?
They crushed it for aggregate for the concrete. They also only gave him 200 acres to begin with, which he promptly said wasn't large enough. You have to understand, this was the so-called second capital. Yes.
Okay, so Henry, go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. I I uh, I worked on the. I would go out there as often as we could because you always had to carry a detail with you, or at least have something ready. And sometimes I would go with Professor Kahn, and we would meet. He would sort of lag back and send me ahead, and I would get the meeting set up in the program, and then he would join us at some point. And but he would only stay. He would only stay a short time, which irritated the officials a bit. But he would always say that Henry would be there if they had any questions, and that's the way it always worked out when we would go out to Dhaka. But as far as going out after Lou's death, I went out there and met with the officials again, and they all knew me from the '60s, the early '60s. So it was quite comfortable, really. I never had any issues with them, and right on up to the speaker himself. So at the time, no. As a matter of fact, speaking of the speaker, this had to be probably in the 80 maybe. Anyway, I met with the speaker, and he had not visited the building, the site at all. He'd only moved around it, and was complaining about the gardens were not ready for him. But I took him into the building, and he was absolutely amazed. And he said that he must get hold of the president and the cabinet to come, and if I would stay long enough so that I could take them to the building. And this did take place. That was when Ziaur Rahman was president at the time. So he came to the site, we met, and I chatted with him and tried to promote the secretariat that was working on, and took him through the building. And he gathered his cabinet together on the steps of the square and said that there was going to be a meeting at 2:00 in the afternoon and everyone must attend, except me, of course. I didn't attend. But what came out of that was that this building must be finished. Now, prior to meeting with him, when Lou and I went out right after the War of Liberation, we met with Sheikh, and he was very much, he was a lot of fun really meeting with him. He was a very happy man, and we talked about.
You mean Sheikh Mujibur Rahman?
Yeah, Sheikh Mujibur. Yeah, right. And he was very, very happy man, and we chatted with him a bit, and had the tea and samosas and whatnot, and he talked about the building. It wasn't ready for him to visit, really. It was still sort of dirty, messy, holes here and there. Site wasn't ready, complete. And that's why we were actually out there, is to get things underway after the war. We wanted to get the site cleaned up, and Lou prepared a program of what buildings need to be taken care of and how we were to go forward.
Okay. Oh, great, great. So Sundaram, again, a question for you. So your documentary focuses on Bangladesh's parliament building, albeit through the study of Louis Kahn's other projects around the world, as well as his historical influences, such as the Pantheon. Your film gave the impression that Kahn was searching for something that we can't quite pinpoint. What do you think he was searching for? Do you think Kahn found his Ithaca in the parliament building after his Odyssey?
Yeah, I think it's very important that what I learned in my research that Khan loved fairy tales. And I think what he created for the people of Bangladesh was another castle, and every fairy tale has a castle. And what I mean by that is that he was truly a romantic. And being a romantic, and it connected with the Bengali sensibility. And that was a connecting point. And that's the reason the client and the architect was a ideal sort of a partnership. And if you look at it, he started the construction of, or started designing the parliamentary complex in I believe it's 62, and 62, 63, and he died in 74, and it was completed in 85 or 84, 85. At that many years, the process becomes very, very important. And for him, if he was trying to find something, he was trying to find that in his process, drawing it and recreating it and over and over and over again. And he had so many iterations of these plans. First, he changed it so many times too, when you think about it. And the final plan is only a partial execution of the plan that he has completed. So yes, I think he was looking for something much more ephemeral, something more spiritual. And if I may veer away a little bit, what was he trying to do and why? And I believe he was searching for something that cannot be pinpointed, and you're absolutely right about that, because through architecture, he was trying to reach something higher, much higher. And I think for him, his religion became architecture, and that's what he believed in. And finally, I think he achieved it in Bangladesh.
Okay. Sue, question for you. Oh, Henry, welcome.
Yes.
We see you now.
Yes, good.
Great.
Good.
Wonderful. So, spotlight on Sue. Your half-brother, Nathaniel Kahn, made a moving documentary. We already talked about that. My Architect, A Son's Journey, which was produced in 2003. Do you recognize your father in that documentary? Or is it a character that seems unfamiliar to you? Do you feel you have known your father anew after seeing this documentary? I should mention that Nathaniel's mother, Harriet Pattison's book, Our Days Are Like Full Years, published from Yale University Press, was launched yesterday. Other books on Kahn's design philosophy keep getting published. What do you think is the reason for this continued interest in Kahn's work? Kahn, Sue, we can. We lost your voice. Yeah,
Oh.
we can hear you now.
Okay, these are books that are out and or are about to come out. The book on the left, Michael Merrill's new book, will be out in February. That's going to be a very important book about drawing. John Lovell's book, that's the red one, has been out. Harriet's book, and then Richard Werman, I should say, a great book. The first book of Lou's drawings is going to be reissued in a facsimile. So there's continued interest. And I want to link this to what Sundaram just said, because we all admire the great ancient buildings to this day. And I think Lou wanted to create architecture that stood the test of time. And I think the Parliament building at Bangladesh is a perfect example, because he truly succeeded, which is why his work will continue to be studied and written about. Nathaniel's movie is a truly great film. And two things I especially enjoyed in watching it, and I must have seen it maybe 30 times by now. I feel my father comes alive again, because he's walking and talking. and in all the footage that Nathaniel has assembled. And how great is that? I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And then the buildings are so marvelously photographed that they seem to come alive on screen for people who have not been there to see them. And it's really the best architectural photography until Sundaram's new film. And I hope all who are listening will go see Louis Kahn's Tiger City.
Okay, great, thank you. So that brings us back to Sundaram. In Tiger City, architect Stephen Hall quotes a poet, quote, "People need architecture like they need bread," unquote. It is rather mystical. What do you think Stephen Hall meant? Given the 1960s politically tempestuous time, both in the US, in Bangladesh, around the world, how do you think Louis Kahn conceived the design of the parliament building? Do you think the people of Bangladesh needed architecture or freedom? Or perhaps Louis Kahn understood that architecture can be both bread and a liberating, spiritualizing force? So Sundaram, before you answer, let's play clip number 2.
His writing was so spiritual. And I think anybody who knew him loved him.
The art of architecture. That's the deepest contribution you can give. I mean, I really believe that's something that transcends the inspiration and the possibility and the hope of art. You know, Osip Mandelstam, the poet, said, "People need poetry like they need bread." I think Kahn would agree with that.
To evoke a sense of spirituality. But it is a primal sense of spirituality. Weeping inside Louis Kahn's building is not too uncommon.
It has a visceral presence that is overwhelming. Yeah, I shed a tear. For him, for it, for the idea that human beings would have the audacity to make something like that.
So Sundaram.
Yeah, I believe what Stephen Hall was saying is that art and architecture is essential. It's not, you can't live by bread alone. And I realize when he's saying that, he's saying it in the context at that time. It's a war-torn country, it's poverty, hunger, death. So it's really a complex issue. But why, as a human being, why do we exist? And for 60,000 years, people have created art. Before any religion, before any civilization, before any economy, before any history. Why? Because, I mean, if you look at our ancestors, after they had their hunting of saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoth, when their food, their body was taken care of, they got together around a fire, they played the flute, they danced, and they created the glorious works of art, the cave paintings in Chauvet and Altamira and all these places are actually a testament to that. So what happens is that without art, we stop being human beings. And I think that's exactly what Stephen Hall is talking about. The bread is not enough. Why do you fight for democracy? Why do you fight for freedom? It's to finally to express. And to express is being a human being. And that's the critical part of being a human. And that's the distinction between animals and human beings, because ethically speaking, animals probably are much better. They don't kill or rob unnecessarily. And we tend to do that. But what's the saving grace of humanity happens to be the fact that we create art or we create architecture, like what Louis Kahn did. And so Louis Kahn left behind this magnificent representation for democracy for the people of Bangladesh. And but also one shouldn't forget, in this context, if you're talking about, what's important is that 2,000 people for 23 years, it was also bread. So it was bread and poetry, both combination. And I think that this ideal partnership came about because the sensibilities were similar.
Okay, okay, great. So Sue, another question for you. Architectural historian Vincent Scully's position that Louis Kahn became Louis Kahn after he visited the sites of classical antiquity when he received a fellowship at the American Academy in Rome in the early 1950s. Scully claimed that Kahn's architecture following this trip began to show a new energy, a new aspiration. Louis Kahn was already in his 50s then. Do you agree with Scully's argument?
Well, there's no question that the significant commissions of the Richards Medical Building and the Yale Art Gallery that came after his trip established his reputation. There is no doubt that his 3-month residence at the Academy was a period of artistic awakening and freedom and renewal. And you only have to look at the breakout drawings he made of the ancient buildings in this period. And I think you'll find, for instance, that Michael Merrill's new book, which is about the importance of drawing, will have a lot to say about that from different authors. And you can also, though, if you look at his housing designs and earlier work, you can see all of these architectural ideas worked out from the beginning. But there's no question that the significant work happened after that, what we view as his significant work.
Okay, okay. Henry,
Yes.
one more question for you. Khan was invited to West Pakistan to design the first capital, so to speak, in Islamabad. I know that you were in Karachi working as an architect before meeting Khan in Dhaka. Khan was eventually unable to work in West Pakistan. Why do you think he could not work in West Pakistan?
I think it might have been very political because there were several architects and engineers working with the Islamabad. Dr.Adnan was there, and but it was after the commission for the Dhaka project, the second capital, that he was invited after having met with the President Ayub Khan to design the palace for the president. And that's how he got into Islamabad. But Islamabad was well underway at the time. I mean, dust was flying all about the place because I was, at that time, I was up in northern Pakistan on assignment. And so I was able to listen to the folks up there. But as far as in the office, this was, before I had arrived to the office, but still in the office, the people who were there were raving about what he had designed for the palace, the way it was laid out and all of its forms and shapes and spaces. But that was not to be. Now I can't address the ins and outs of the contractual agreement or non-agreement because I don't know that much about it.
Okay, thank you.
But see,
okay, did you, okay. So Sue, returning to you again, Louis Kahn frequently used a notion of spirituality when discussing architecture. Does a particular God anchor his notion of spirituality? What type of God was this? Why was he so committed to making architecture spiritual? Do you think his architecture was a critique of capitalism, consumerism, and so forth?
Indirectly, perhaps it was, because he never had much patience for consumerism. But I think Sundaram already touched on this, I mean, he wasn't religious, but he was very spiritual. And there's no question that architecture with a capital A was the divinity he answered to. And I think Sundaram put that very well already. And he often referred to the spirit of architecture. That was something he talked about all the time. And after all, he designed a church, a synagogue, and a mosque with equal devotion. Although I know one of his greatest disappointments was that his design for the Mikveh Israel Synagogue in Philadelphia was never built. That was a great disappointment, and perhaps he had a particular feeling for the city of Philadelphia and because he was Jewish. But after all, he was a Jewish immigrant who built a mosque in one of the poorest countries of the world. And I think that says a lot for his spirituality.
Thank you. Henry, returning to you again. So the Parliament building in Dhaka consumed pretty much the time, the prime years of your professional life. Yet, ironically, you never got to see the finished building that was called one of the most significant buildings of the 20th century. Do you miss seeing the building as finished? Are you in any way nostalgic about the project? What do you think is the building's magic?
20 years that I spent with it, and that does not go away. Nostalgic, I don't quite follow that, but I dream about this place all the time, really, because there were things that that needed to be done, yeah. And one of the most disheartening things that took place was that when the military decided to destroy what we called A Road. It was a boulevard that passed by the building, and it was multi-laned. There was lanes for the pedestrians, for the rickshaws, for the autos, and a plantation, and it was quite nice, and it was well underway at the time that you know, the military came in and destroyed it. And I was out there at one time when I was out there, and several members of the PWD office met me at the airport and said that I must see this. And before taking me to the hotel, they took me to the A Road to see how it had been destroyed. And I took this up with the Secretary of PWD at the time, Secretary of Works. And when I walked into the door, he just shook his head and raised his hands and says, do not talk about it. He knew why I was there. But I wish that, you know, there are the architects and members of PWD now that I had met with when they came to Philadelphia. And I spoke to them about this. And I'm hoping that one day it could be restored, that they would follow the master plan and put that boulevard back in its place. You know, there was also a gate at the head of the, I wish I had the plan here, at the head of that boulevard. And at the time it was designed, and Rayon Lerner worked on that religiously, and it was a brick arch building, open to the elements, but there were to be panels in marble of incised with sayings of the poets of Bengal and whatnot, and and even from the Muhammad, but it was never built. And the drawings are there in the archives. It's all ready to go. All you have to do is change the name of it because it was called IU Gate. You can change that name, but the design is there, and then maybe one day somebody will come along and want to do it. But the boulevard should be.
It was not built because of the lack of funding, or why was it not built?
No, there was great dispute about it, and independence was in the air.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
the last time it was like that. You could feel something was going to take place. It was like the coming of the monsoon.
So I'm sure we will have questions about the 1971 during Q&A. But do you want to very quickly, before we move on to the next question to Sundaram, do you want to talk a little bit about 1971, the pre-1971? When was the time you felt that you have to leave the country and return to the USA because situation in Bangladesh politically and militarily was not safe anymore?
Well, we had an office there, a side office, and it was, there were three people who maintained that office. And they had to leave, had to be evacuated just before the war took place, because it was there, it was all around them. And I went out there to look the situation over, to see what was happening in the building. There was no one working there. There was a few laborers around, but other than that, it was all very, very quiet. And the building at that time was under guard. It was being guarded, and but you knew something was about to take place. The chief engineer at that time and the work secretary invited me to chat about what was to take place and the disappointment in the delays of the building, of its construction. And it was just sort of a friendly conversation, but very pointed. And even in the evening when they, back into Karachi, there was a meeting. We had a meeting there talking about the work and how we could go forward. But you knew that there was something going on. But I stayed out of the politics of it, and I know the professor did. So, that never came up.
Okay. So let's return to Sundaram. Sundaram, it is a bit of a political question. If you allow me, let's talk about politics for a second. Kahn was an immigrant to the USA. How do you think he would have felt in America today?
I think Kahn probably wouldn't recognize his own country. And if you look at what is happening in the States in terms of in terms of humanity, right? It's becoming so brittle as a culture, and it's coming out of politics, as you know. And there's so much criticism against immigrants, right? But when you look at it, they have provided so much vitality and creativity, just like Kahn himself, and to criticize those people, essentially it's a country of immigrants. And then you end up criticizing the immigrants. And without immigration and without the immigrants, in terms of the contribution to American society, it's one can't even imagine in terms of the abstract expressionists, even talking in terms of music, in terms of architecture, in a literary side of the story. So it's unbelievable. So that vitality and creativity that they have contributed to the society, and they're being hammered for it right now. So I think it's very sad, and it's I believe he wouldn't have recognized his own country. That's my opinion, just an opinion.
Okay, all right. I hope I didn't put you on the spot, but you know, your anxiety is shared by many. So Henry, I want to return to you one more time. This is our final question to the panelists. So my question to you is, you already mentioned that you met Bangabandhu, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the father of the Bangladeshi nation. So when you talked to him, can you recall an instance in which he talked about his expectation from the parliament building, something particular, something specific? Can you recall something, he saying something about the Bengal Delta, about Bengali nation's aspiration, conceptualized or encapsulated by the parliament building that was being constructed then? Can you think of one specific instance he said something about the parliament building?
No, I don't think he had that much interest in it. He talked more about the proposed secretariat that was absolutely necessary for members of the administration, his cabinet and whatnot. That was on his mind, and he did not wish to make it too expensive. He talked about, you know, the monetary issues of that. As far as I get, my sense is that the parliament building for him was already underway. It just needed to be completed. And what he spoke to Professor Kahn about was as I said, the secretariat.
Okay, great. I think that would,
yeah, I was sorry that we didn't have the time. Well, you know, it was a very hectic time, and he was answering calls to all of his constituents and, you know, all of Bengal. And so he was quite a busy man. The Secretary of Works is the one who initiated the meeting. And when we were out there, and he's the one that arranged everything, because he was quite close to the president.
I hope that your statement would be an impetus for the Bangladeshi administration to build the secretariat as proposed by Louis Kahn, and it would be a privilege to have his secretariat built as he proposed it. So let me return to, I'm sorry.
The drawings are there.
Okay, yes, the drawings are there. So let me return to Sundaram, my final question. Sundaram, a debate has been surging lately in America, in Europe, in particularly, you know, I experienced it in Washington, DC, concerning the classical tradition and modernism in architecture, as if these are two separate episodes in the history of architecture. Many classicists consider modernism as whimsical, devoid of order and principle. Many modernists view classicism as being stuck in an antiquated tradition. This binary view is not very helpful. Kahn is one of those architects who showed how classicism and modernism can inform each other. Salk Institute, Kimball, and the Parliament Building in particular reveal modernism in classicism and classicism in modernism. Do you see, feel, experience the Pantheon or the Parthenon in Kahn's work, particularly in the Parliament building that you have studied so closely? Before you answer, Sundaram, let's watch clip number 3, and then we will hear your answer.
Adnan Morshed is an architectural historian and helps me understand the importance of Kahn's visits to Rome.
Kahn was the deeply committed architect who wanted to create architecture, buildings that would be timeless. In the same way, the Pantheon would appeal to people of all cultures. There is a sense of universal beauty. When you look at the oculus, the light beam filtering in from heavens, it overwhelms everybody who enters that building. I think that left an indelible impression on his aesthetic consciousness, that beauty was not necessarily has a very specific locale. It can have some kinds of universal resonance. I think his challenge was to combine these two, East and West. Kahn had a very revered stature among the architectural community in Bangladesh. These massive cutouts are actually windows at an urban scale. They are not meant to be a little window for a house. They are windows for the city. They are semantic tools to communicate with the city. I think if you look at all these projects collectively, there is an overarching theme. That overarching theme is light. How do you create a luminous environment inside a building? If you go inside the Parliament building, you walk around the ambulatory, you will see that natural light, it creates an ambience. I think it was this sense of timelessness and a kind of a mystical element that would appeal to people of all cultures. I think Kahn's work combines a kind of a peculiar phenomenology of the site. If you go to Parliament, you will also feel that mystical power, but you will also have an element, in some ways Bengali. It's a kind of a microcosm of the Bengal Delta. A place has a spirit.
Okay. I think you explained it really well, right?
No, but you need to explain it better.
But I believe, you know, as we all know, that Kahn wanted to create architecture, great weight, mass, and gravity, and he loved masonry architecture. That's the reason he went back to places like Rome and Greece. But here, he was creating architecture for the subcontinental client, and he needed to create a marriage between the two worlds, both East and the West. And for that, he actually traveled through all the Mughal destinations, right? And he went to India, he traveled throughout Bangladesh, and he understood. And within that, when you look at that, it's a gray monolithic structure, within that, inlays of marble, that's within, and the cutouts. It has a certain relationship with the Mughal architecture to a certain extent. But it's not derivative, because Kahn was such a master builder. He knew exactly what to extract, and all geniuses tend to have that, right? And that's what he was able to create. So he created modernity, even the modern. When you look at the history of modernism, let's see it in that context. Even if Picasso and BRAC and Matisse, they were rejecting that tradition, they were going into other cultures' tradition in order to create the language or syntax or the vocabulary of modernism, right? So Picasso left the classical or neoclassical language and so did BRAC, or so did Matisse. But they went to Oceanic art, they went to African art, they went to Borobudur, they went to Islamic art, they went to all these cultures. They really, and extracted from that in order to create their own language. So Kahn, I think one of the reasons he is classified to a certain extent as a postmodernist, a precursor to postmodernism, because he created this great marriage between the two worlds, modernity and tradition of great classical architecture, and a perfect blend. And that's what intrigued me from the very beginning when I saw that. It was a magnificent kind of a sort of encapsulation of the values of the East and the West. And how was he able to create that? And that's what sort of intrigued me. I don't know if it answers your question, but that's what.
No, it did. So I saved the last question for Sue. So Sue, the last question for you. I know you have never been to Dhaka, never saw the Parliament building in person, but you have seen it in and out, I'm sure, in a zillion pictures and films. Can you picture your feeling if you saw the building today in person? How would you go around it? What spot would you go to first?
You know, this is impossible to imagine. I know, like everyone else, I would just break down in tears. And I expect to be utterly overwhelmed by it. And that could be a reason why I haven't been there yet. And maybe you would have to lead me around, Adnan or Sundaram. I don't know where I would go first. It's all quite overwhelming. I guess of the buildings, and I've seen almost every building he built. I guess my favorite so far is the Kimmel Museum, which is a very, very different kind of monumentality and kind of classicism, because you're entirely embraced as a human being when you walk in there. And the scale is quite different. It's not overwhelming, it's enveloping, and you feel safe in there. And I know you were going to ask me about what was my favorite building, but of course I haven't been to Dhaka, so I'm sure that would become my favorite if I had been there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And perhaps we should plan a trip. This panel. I personally would be eager to take you, Henry, and Sundaram, and we could go together and have this session in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, in front of a big crowd. And I think that would be fabulous to do. Henry, will you be able to, are you willing to come join us in the trip?
I have been asked this question over the years many times, and I've always said yes, but nothing has ever come about. Now, who's going to arrange this and do it before I get too old? I want to inject something here. When you were talking about the ambulatory, what it is and where it comes from is really like old Dhaka. It's walking through a city, and the buildings open up and close in on you. The light changes as you move about it, and as the light itself moves about. And that's what it's all about. But one of the interesting things way early on when it was being designed, and the professor was talking with the members out there, and the chief engineer at that time was a man called Kafiluddin Ahmed. And what he told the professor was, one day I want to get up in the morning and ride my bicycle on the roof of this building. And that's why it is so evenly and flat up there. Because Lou pictured Ahmed riding his bicycle in the dawn, or circling the outside of the ambulatory, because it's still the ambulatory above.
Well, you just planted some dangerous ideas in the mind of many people. They would bring their bicycles in the building. So, you know, so just tell us that that's an imagination. So I think we have concluded our question part to the panelists, and I can see that there are many questions. So are you ready to answer some questions, panelists?
Other buildings and aspects.
Okay. All right. So let's go to our questions. Let me see if I can access them. Okay. So I will try to go one by one. We have quite a few questions. So when we have about 25 minutes to respond to them. So here, this is a question from Rita Raman. Following the life's philosophy of Louis Kahn, do you believe that it is imperative to be a good human being in becoming a good architect? I don't know who want to pick it up, but feel free. Is it imperative to be a good human being in becoming a good architect? So good architect, good human being, can they be together? And could Kahn's philosophy be a thrust toward that goal?
Well,
I think you have to be human. And that's what he was. And that's who he saw was the humanity of it all.
Okay.
His buildings really, all of them, have to do with people. And he loved it. He loved the people. And even in his sketches, funny little charcoals and whatnot, there was always people within the spaces.
Okay,
Sue. Can I say?
Yes,
can I just
yes,
add
Sue.
that
Go ahead.
He could relate to people of any country speaking any language. He could immediately connect with people. He had a terrific way of that, and I think that's why so many people adored him and loved him. And what Henry said, that he was human, and that infuses all of his architecture, from his houses to the mightiest of buildings, I believe. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So next question, and it's from Janarthan Case. My question is to both Sue and Henry. We all have felt timelessness and the spiritual essence in all of Louis Kahn's projects. Being the closest to Lou, how did you recognize and experience that Louis Kahn was searching a higher level of consciousness himself, conscience himself, along with all his projects? Was he, was he searching for a higher level of conscience himself? Yeah.
Well, he always answered to higher. He always wanted to know, to Corbusier, how he was doing. He always looked to the ancient buildings to know how he was doing. And yes, I think the whole idea of architecture as a spiritual pursuit was very important. Henry?
Okay.
Also in his work, he had to understand and search for the making of it. And you will see even in the Parliament building, how it was made. He wanted to see that, and he wanted to recognize that and honor that part of the making.
Okay. So next question. Okay, yes, so Sundaram, please go ahead.
I was just adding to this point that he really admired Corbusier very much, and somewhere along, I think he said something like, I dreamt that I lived in a beautiful city called Corbusier, Le Corbusier. So it was an homage to Corbusier, and I think Henry, who actually informed me that he had been to Chandigarh to see the Capitol complex there. And if you see his architecture, you can see the architecture of mass and kind of a brutalist quality that he has created and for the parliamentary complex. There's some affinity, but it's Louis Kahn, you know, absolutely Louis Kahn. And then he spoke with Doshi. Doshi had just died. Not Doshi. I mean, Corbusier had just died, and Doshi had come to Philadelphia to meet Louis Kahn. And he said, "For whom shall I create art? Who is there to see my work?" Meaning Corbusier wasn't there. And then what was the purpose of it? So he really deeply admired Corbusier. So in that context, the question that you had asked, he was always aware of it. Of course, it wasn't Frank Lloyd Wright. And of course, it wasn't Mies van der Rohe. It was Corbusier in that respect. He was channeling him.
Thank you. So next question is from Daniela Sousa from Portugal. It's a long question, but let me just summarize the question to save time. She's asking about what is the importance of skylight at Kimball? What does it do for Kimball, the skylight at the peak of the apex of the dome? So anybody, you want to respond to this question?
That strip of light, the apex of the dome, actually had to do with the parting of the structure. And he developed that, and he also wanted the natural light to come through, but then you will see the light fixture below that spreads the light for you. So it reflects off the inner ceiling of the dome.
Okay,
so one of the museums are wrapped in what, fabric or whatever, cloth, to keep light out, but Kimball brings light in.
So Sue, I know that this is your favorite Kahn building. Do you have any particular insights into your experience of the skylight at Kimball?
Oh, I think Henry said it completely, and that everything looks beautiful in there. Art looks really wonderful. Of course, they have a great collection there because the light is very softly deployed by the slit, and then the way the light filters along the curved walls, and so you're never in a glare. You're never aware of a light source, but it's all around you. And I think Henry really answered that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on to next question. This is interesting. To what extent did Kahn's aspirations for the timeless, the awe the Dhaka building inspires, reconcile with the actual practical experiences of a parliament building? So on the one hand, we have the issues of timelessness, spirituality, and all that. But the parliament building also has to serve as a functional building for for thousands of people. Perhaps, Henry, do you want to respond to that question? The timelessness issue and the practical issue.
As to utilitarianism. That's what it was all about. It was to be there as a place to work. And that's what he had in mind all along with it. I mean, it was a working house.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes when people talk about the monument of it all, I sort of, cringe. It bothers me because I do not consider it a monument.
So it's
really a factory.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Yeah. So when you walk into that building, I'm someone from outside coming in, and immediately it's not only awe-inspiring, as I said before, it's Piranesian. It feels like, it's like, oh my, this is ancient, and yet it's modern. But what's important is that you feel it's an exalted space. He's managed to create that. Like when you walk into St. Peter's sort of cathedral, it feels like you are important. You're walking into that space. It kind of makes you think about, for instance, it makes you think about democracy. It makes you think about culture, civilization. And not all architectures do that, but this building does. And that was the greatness of Louis Kahn, that everything that he designed, whether you're talking about Kimball, when you walk through that space, this diffuse light, you're floating through it, actually in a museum space. In this building, when you're walking in, you feel like there's some important part, a role to play, whether you are as a participant in terms of as a citizen or as someone who is essentially the lawmakers. You're playing a role, and you're guided by the spirit of that architecture. The greatness of the architecture makes you do important things and the right things. That's what I feel. Maybe that's my reaction.
Sure. So next question is very interesting, and it's also, I also wanted to ask that question. It's directed to Henry. How difficult was it to get such a complex building executed at site, especially when during the times when there was no computers? How difficult was it to translate the ideas to actual work through the locally available labor? Very good question, Henry.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Yes, there were no computers, and it's amazing if you go into the archives and study the drawings, and you'll look and you'll say, it's all graphite, and it's one of the most beautiful drawings of that building, of the Parliament building itself, is the drawings that were produced by the engineer for the PALs. The foundation plan of that is a marvelous drawing. And Lou called it a jewel. And it was to be hung and framed, because everything, that whole drawing is done by hand. And you see all these little round piles and the cappings of the pile drawing, of the piling itself, and they're all labeled and identified. And it's a beautiful drawing. And if you ever get a chance to look at it, do so.
Okay, fantastic. So the next question is again by William Whitaker to Henry. So the question is, you had the experience of living in South Asia before working for Kahn, as did a series of Kahn staff who operated his field office in Dhaka. What do you, and by extension, your Kahn office colleagues such as Roy, Fred, Gus, Neil, Al, take away from the experience of living in Dhaka? So in other words, what do you take away from your experience in Dhaka?
A great deal, actually. I miss going out there. And there was a family. There was a husband and wife. They were the parents of a man that I had met in Pakistan. He was a soldier from Bengal in the Pakistan Army, Special Forces. And we met and chatted, and he gave me his parents' address in Dhaka. And so whenever I had the opportunity, I would take an afternoon tea with them. And it was just a marvelous couple, elderly people, and she, of course, wanted me to call her auntie. And he was a professor and had been teaching at the University of Dhaka, Dhaka University is where he taught and lectured. So actually they became part of a family. And I often refer to my friends, my family of friends in Bangladesh. So I really enjoyed being out there.
Okay, so next question, I guess Sue can answer these. So Khan's travel sketches. Sue, you have worked with your father's travel sketches. You helped curate some exhibitions. So the question by Mr. Ahmed K. Ali is that how did his sketches, particularly those produced in Egypt, influence his aesthetic consciousness?
I think it's hard to pin down, but he was always drawing from the time I think he was just about born, and working out his sensibilities about light and space through drawing. And I think that these drawings come from that period that you mentioned when he was at the American Academy for 3 months, 1952. And I think he just was looking at how the light informed those buildings, how the light struck the buildings, and he would draw it, and with many colors as well. I think it just everywhere he looked informed his architecture, and at that period he was just he was free from the constraints of his office and going in there every day, and he was just looking at everything in a new way, perhaps, and just taking it all in. I think it's impossible to say directly that there would be an influence from Egyptian buildings to what he did, but I think he was very inspired by the Southern light and by the monumentality of everything. I hope I answered that.
Okay, sure. These maybe all three of you, if you want, respond to these questions, and I think it's pertinent. Is which building would Khan consider his favorite building, or if was there one? Which building he designed and Khan was the most passionate about?
It was the question too. To me, he talked more about Salk than any of the other buildings, I think. At least with me, when he would speak to me about things. As far as the Parliament building, he had problems with liking the concrete work. Because he had wanted the little fins that came about in the farm, where the farm work was made of panels of wood, strips of wood 6 inches or so wide. And at the joint, he wanted a little V, there was a little V groove, and he wanted that to be expressed in the final product of the concrete. But it was very difficult to keep. And of course, it kept breaking off. But he finally got around to accepting the fact that that's the way it was going to be. And it was going to show how the building was being made.
Okay.
But
okay.
In my opinion, when you look at Kahn's work in concrete and Le Corbusier's work in concrete, Corbusier's work was more brutal and raw. Kahn did not go for the rawness.
Interesting. That's a good distinction. That's the feeling one would get visiting to Chandigarh and Dhaka, and feel the difference in the treatment of concrete in these two capital complexes. Sue, you wanted to say something?
I I just want to say, I mean, I can't possibly, I don't think it's possible for anyone to know what was his favorite building, but he did say something about the Kimball, which was that he felt he was never satisfied when his buildings were complete, you know. He always, in fact, he would still be designing them even when they were being built, and even after they were built, he would think of something maybe better, too late, but better. And there are famous stories about people saying, "No, no, Mr. Kahn, we can't do this again." But I think with the Kimball Museum, he did say that he felt I don't know how he put it, I remember, but he felt his hand was being, that God was moving his hand when he designed it. I think he felt that he had gotten it right with that building. And he may very well have felt that about Bangladesh had he lived to see it complete. But with Kimball, which was the last building, I think, before he died, it was completely completed while he was alive. He felt he got it right. And that was very unusual for him. But I think he did feel that.
Okay, and there's another question by Dana Sekeran. And the question is there a building not designed by him that was his favorite, by Louis Kahn's favorite? Did he talk about a building that was by somebody else or from earlier eras?
Pantheon. He talked about
Pantheon or Pantheon.
But I think just to add to your point, I think as an architect, he was highly sophisticated. He possessed a very sophisticated and refined taste. And even when you're creating the distinction between Corbusier and Kahn, and that comes through. Even he had a conversation with Doshi, and he was really upset with them when they were creating this brickworks. And said, how can he create a brickwork like this? You have to create, the lines have to be very refined. But even when you walk through Kimball or you look at his other structures, they're very, very sophisticated and very elegant in some ways. You know, that's what I've learned from my research. Okay. And he had a very refined taste.
Okay.
I'm not answering your question. Maybe we need to respond back to that.
So next question is for Henry. Sergeant Wilcots, how did your service as one of America's first Black Marines lay the foundation for your education and work as one of the few African American architects?
Discipline. One word. And you carry that through, and it helped me enormously wherever I went, and the people that I spoke with, and it helped me greatly in Pakistan, because like I said, I was at one time assigned to oversee, and it certainly wasn't architecture, but oversee the rehabilitation of barracks on a cantonment out of Jhelum. I don't know if you know the geography of Pakistan or not, but out of Jhelum there's a cantonment called Karian, and all military, and here I am, the only American other than a radio listening post up there, Black, and there I am, and actually they thought I was a Bengali. They had never seen a Bengali, and you know, it was all military, and I said, well, I'll have to call on my experience as a Marine to carry out the job, which I did.
Okay, excellent. Henry, one more question for you. Were you always paid on time while working with Kahn?
Oh, we won't get into that. No, the office was actually a shoestring kind of office. It was more like a studio, than an office. It wasn't carried out as an office. It was a studio. And the thing that I miss most after I started my own practice and bummed around a bit is the search, because when Kahn was always in search of something, and that's what I miss. And when you take on a project, you must search, and that's the way I felt about being there.
So this question, next question is for Sue. So was your father involved at all in your choice of your career? Does you see a relationship between music and architecture? Or in other words, did your father have a say in your choice of career? And do you see a connection between music and architecture?
Well, first of all, my father was a musician. He was very talented in music, and his life could have gone either way. He could have been a musician or an artist. And so I really received the gift of music from him and also from my mother's family. And he was very supportive and rather upset if I didn't practice enough and if I played sports instead of practicing piano or flute or whatever. And there are people that call architecture frozen music, which I find very hard to reconcile. But I think art all, no matter what the expression of art and beauty, it all springs from the same place. So I don't know how to answer that question any other way, really.
Okay. Okay, so that was a question from Steve Kreter, who you know, from Steve. Hi, Steve. The next question is from Nasser Jamil, who's my friend and colleague. We studied architecture together. Hi, Nasser. He's in Canada, I know. We have mighty buildings in East Asia by two giant architects, Corbusier and Kahn, at the peak of their career. How was it possible to get them involved? So it's a broad question. We generally know how they got involved, but if you want to kind of briefly share your thought about that, that'd be great. How did they get involved, and how did they find, utilize their energy in getting these projects done?
I don't know how Corbusier got the job in India, in Chandigarh, but Lou came about because of Maruz Islam, who had studied under Kahn at Yale, and he also came out of, I think, Oregon University, too. So, and he introduced Lou to, Dhaka, or Pakistan at the time. And that's how that came about. And he sort of was the lead man on convincing the president at the time, President Ayub Khan at the time, on choosing an international architect, and it should be someone like Louis Kahn.
Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So the story, what I have done, what I have gathered happens to be first, in terms of the Dhaka project, went to Alvar Aalto, and Aalto missed his flight. The circulating story happens to be that he got drunk, but actually got sick. And I saw the certificate in Helsinki. And then they went to Le Corbusier. But Corbusier said, I'm too busy designing the capital of Punjab. I don't have the time. Then Muzarul Islam called up, and he was the only trained architect at that time in Pakistan, East and West. So he called up Louis Kahn's studio, and Louis Kahn picked up the phone and said, when can we start? Very characteristic of him. So that's how I think it unfolded. And obviously, Kahn was the right person because the sensibility is connected for him to create a structure and of such magnificence.
So Sundaram, you think that the offer first went to Alto first, and then Corbusier, and then to Kahn first Alto?
Correct. Yeah, first to Alto.
That's your research.
And Alto missed his flight.
But the offer first went to Alto first, according to your research.
It came from the West Pakistani side, of course, as you can understand. Right. So, it went to Alto first, and then to Corbusier and to Kahn. So,
okay, I think we are in our last 5 minutes. The next question is from Dilruba Firdaus Shubra. She said, why would Kahn build something so futuristic? Was it futuristic in your view? Henry?
No, if she's talking about the parliament, there's nothing futuristic about it.
National Assembly.
So, you could say it's timeless.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It's timeless. Not futuristic.
Timeless. Okay, okay.
Ancient and modern, but he's also reflecting upon the aesthetics of kind of modern age, right? He knows about art. He knows about what's happening, the discourse that's taking place in the other fields as well, and you can see that the kind of geometrical precision that he is applying, and it's part of the architectural discourse.
Okay. So the next question, I think we already, Henry already addressed that. Will Gray, how did your service in the Marines affect your work? I think you already addressed that question.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And then, okay. So this is from Suja to Henry. Did you have to change the details for the concrete in the upper floors? There is quite a variation in the quality of concrete.
The building had two major contractors, and so it was divided up between these two major contractors, and so you'll see some differences between the two. One was what was it, Dominion, and the other was United or something like that. Anyway, one was by an engineer contractor who understood engineering. The other was a fellow who was really a pseudo politician, and they used to not get along too well, but they each had parts of the building, so you will see differences. And also, there's differences take place in the mixture of the concrete itself, the cement, because the cement came from different parts, of the world, basically. So you'll see differences there, and that's where the marble plays a part, because it can separate, so that you get a total picture of the whole thing, rather than these segments of blotches and whatnot,
So Henry, I wanted to ask you to piggyback on that question. Was the usage of marble bands decided as the project was going on, or it was part of the building's iconography right from the beginning?
It was part of it from the beginning, because in the study of the work out there, what was going to take place is that the concrete was being poured by hand, basically, at the time, and that they could only pour so much in a day. And so it was based on that 5-foot dimension. And so where the end of one day's concrete and where another began, that is what Lou would call the drama, was going to take place at that point. And that's where the marble came into play. The marble actually came from Quetta and was shipped out, into Dhaka.
Okay.
And now later on, some of the marble, because they ran out of the Quetta marble, and this was after independence, that some of the marble actually came out of India.
Okay. So both Pakistan, West Pakistan and India, marble came from West Pakistan and India.
Yeah, but majority of it came from West Pakistan.
Quetta. Okay, Quetta, West Pakistan. So the next question by Muhammad Rahman, very interesting question. So the project was being referred to as the second capital. Was Kahn himself using the term?
Yes, I mean, you'll see the early drawings, the label on the drawings are called second capital. Because that's what it was. That's what it was.
Was Kahn himself using the term in the deliberation in the office?
No, he just said capital.
Capital. Okay.
Yeah, but we all knew it was, the second capital. And what was really funny kind of a way is that after independence, I would go out there and some of the laborers and people within Dhaka city still referred to it as second capital. And they would have to be corrected, and even in meetings, someone would get up and talk about the second capital, and he was being corrected by saying, it is the first capital.
Okay, so I think we will take two more questions. The one other question is, there is the column underneath the library, one column, according to, that is probably the only column in the entire complex underneath the library. Any thought on the use of one column, Henry?
That is the only column in the building. Right. That you can see. That you can see. Yeah. Engineers will say something else.
What would they say?
They'll say that there's various columns throughout the building because of the way the reinforcing is placed.
Okay.
But he designed the building. Sorry, he designed the building. Conceptually, he thought it's a hollow column. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And because the whole building, the way it's structured,
is a column.
It's a column, yeah. And it's a hollow column. So the hollow part is where the people are occupying the space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another question, I'm taking parts of it. Nubra Samain, she is asking, Kahn read fairy tales. Perhaps Sue, you can answer this question. Why did he did he read fairy tales, and how and why was he into fairy tales? How did he relate architecture to fairy tales?
I think having the idea to create something, a fantasy, you think of something, and he did love fairy tales, and you didn't have, and he had this, I don't want to say childlike, but he never lost that the sense of wonder that you have as a child, and the sense of wonder that is captured by fairy tales, that anything is possible. So I think he always believed that, and never lost his faith in that.
So I guess that's the time we have.
He enjoyed movies, and even in Dhaka, he went to the cinema.
How interesting!
Oh, yeah. Okay. Do you Henry? Do you recall any particular film he watched in Dhaka in the cinema hall?
No. I'll tell you this. I was not with him at the time, but some of the PWD folks told me the story that one time the professor sat down in the cafeteria and played the piano for them, which really amazed them all. They loved him. He was very well liked out there.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's the time we have today. Before we conclude, let me thank our tech team who supported and helped organize this meeting today. They worked behind the scene. We had some technical difficulties at the beginning. I apologize for that. But it was good to have Henry's video back. There were people looking forward to seeing you, Henry, and Sue and Sundaram. I thank all the participants and the people who asked questions and people taking the time, all the participants who took the time today on Friday. It's a weekend in Bangladesh and a work day in other places. Thank you for participating in this conversation. I hope that we can continue these because there's so much to talk about. But most of all, I would like to thank Ann Kahn, Henry Wilcots, and Sundaram Tagore for taking this time to talk about your ideas, to talk about your views about one of the iconic architects of the 20th century. And as I mentioned earlier, that the interest in Kahn's work has not diminished. Its books are coming out. So I hope that we can one day take all of you to Dhaka together. And I promise that I will record Henry, Sue's reaction seeing the building. I will not focus my camera on the Parliament building. I will focus my camera on your face and how you respond to that building. It would be a fascinating thing to behold. And Sundaram, thank you for making the film. It's wonderful, and I encourage everybody to see the film. And I want to thank Shafayat, the project architect at the Center for Inclusive Architecture and Urbanism at BRAC University, for helping us organize these. Palash at BRAC University, and I also want to thank my research assistant and teaching assistant, Mackenzie Bannister, Leo Ellis, and Mitch Ford. Thank you. Good night. Good night to all, and thank you again. Thank you. Goodbye. Take care of yourself. Take care. Bye bye.
See ya.